This is going to be one of my more divisive videos I've ever made. And I don't want to do it. I have to do it. I need to do it. It is imperative that I make this video, but I don't want to. Do you think I want to rank the albums of one of the most beloved bands of the last 20 years with one of the most loyal and rabid fan bases of all time? This is literally my favorite band
of all time.
Why am I making myself choose? This album's great. This album's great. This album's great. This album? Guess what?
Great.
I'm Trevor, staying cool. That's the end of the video. Goodbye. Hello and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I'm Trevor and I am eternally uncool. I make videos about music, music culture, and anything that interests me. But mostly music right now. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, then I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and watching the rest of this video. My Chemical Romance has been my favorite band since I was 15 years old. When I discovered songs like Welcome to the Black Parade and Helena, I was blown away. I had never heard music like this before. It was new and exciting. Up until that point, my only exposure to emo had been Green Day and Blink-182. And they're not even emo. I was a weird kid whose musical taste consisted of 90s alternative bands, singer-songwriters like Ben Folds and Ben Lee, and whatever pop drivel they were playing on VH1's Top 20 Countdown. But when I discovered My Chemical Romance, my life was changed. And no, I'm not being dramatic.
You are.
My Chem became my favorite band not just because of the music, but because of the people making the music. I was drawn to the personalities of Frank, Ray, Mikey, and Gerard. Gerard Way especially. He became my idol because I saw so much of my own personality in him. We were both reclusive artists in our 20s who, for personal reasons, decided to actually do something with their art. He was also one of the reasons why I myself quit drinking, because he did it. MCR is a band with so much personality that every member feels integral. Like it wouldn't be the same if one of them had left. And of course the music is great too. My Chem always got stuck with the emo label, more so than other bands in their genre in the 2000s. I think that it had partly to do with the fact that they were very theatrical and they wore makeup and costumes. And partly to do with Gerard's very personal lyrics, despite the fact that they were hidden behind metaphors and stories and characters. But I always thought they were more than just emo music. My Chemical Romance has gone on to be recognized as one of the most beloved and important bands of all time. They've inspired so many artists from so many different genres. 21 Pilots, Crown the Empire, Billie Eilish, Post Malone. Even Anthony Fantano admits to liking My Chemical Romance. When they broke up, it left a void in the music world. And then when they came back, it's like they exploded that void. Their reunion sold out in minutes. A new single. And adoration of fans, old and new. That's why this video is so hard to make. This video is probably going to be a little bit different than my previous ranking videos. In most of those videos, there were albums that I actually didn't enjoy and I actually had negative opinions about. But My Chemical Romance doesn't have an album that I have any negative opinions about. So what I think I'm gonna do is list the albums from least essential to most essential, if that makes any sense. Just like in previous ranking videos, I'm only going to be doing the studio albums. You won't see live albums like Life on the Murder Scene or compilations like Conventional Weapons. And remember, this is my personal opinion. These rankings are not definitive. Don't come at me for putting your favorite album at the bottom or your least favorite album at the top. It's not that serious. Relax. Breathe. With all that being said, let's get into My Chemical Romance least essential to most essential. I don't know if I like that terminology. Let's get into the video. Danger Days is probably the most polarizing MCR album because of the stylistic switch. Up until that point, My Chemical Romance was known for being the goth punk vampire boys with all black outfits and looking very spooky. And all that gothiness and spookiness came to a head on The Black Parade. Recording and touring for The Black Parade was an exhaustive and traumatic experience for the members of the band. With the next album, the band wanted to take a more stripped down and raw approach, eschewing high concepts and characters for something a little bit more fun. They brought in Brendan O'Brien to work on a sound that was more punky, kind of like their cover of Desolation Row for the Watchmen soundtrack. But they felt this approach was holding them back, becoming unhappy with the final product. So that album was shelved and eventually became Conventional Weapons. The band eventually went back into the studio with Black Parade producer Rob Cavallo, who helped reinvigorate the band and get them back on track. This album became a rock opera, similar to the band's previous albums. It told the story of the Killjoys, a renegade group in the apocalyptic year of 2019. To be fair, this album was released in 2010. 2019 really felt like the future back then. Thought we were all gonna have flying cars and hoverboards. I was lied to. And the Killjoys fight against an evil corporation that has vampire henchmen. The album's sound was a lot sunnier, featuring elements of electronic and more alternative rock, as opposed to the goth and metal influences we saw on the band's previous work. This confused a lot of fans.
Was My Chemical Romance going pop?
I think I remember seeing something where the band said that this album, they wanted to make it sound like what they thought rock music would sound like in the year 2019. And they weren't wrong. My Chemical Romance did the electronic rock thing long before the rest of the emo bands jumped on the bandwagon. Fall Out Boy was still on hiatus at this point. They hadn't released Save Rock and Roll yet. Panic at the Disco was still a year away from going steampunk with Vices and Virtues. And 3 years away from going electropop with Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die. They were way behind, I tell you what. So MCR was really ahead of the curve with this one. I liked this new sound when I first heard it. A song like Na 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 is a punch in the face of comic book influences and a masterclass in pop songwriting. That hook and chorus just gets stuck in your head, man. And then you have a song like Sing that is so anthemic and huge and resonant that it was even included on Glee. Fucking Glee.
Fuck you, Glee.
And Planetary Go is probably the most danceable song My Chemical Romance has ever written. And it's not just the singles that are great, the deep cuts are awesome too. Bulletproof Heart is like the best song the Killers never wrote. And Summertime is so beautiful and heartbreaking. And of course you can't forget the Twilight disc Vampire Money. So why is Danger Days at the bottom of my list? While I do hold a lot of nostalgia for the album, especially since it was released on my 16th birthday, I don't think it's a good representation of the band. Sure, it shows their creativity and range as a band, but the sunshiny electro-pop sound was never really them. MCR comes from a dark place. Whether it's their origins in 9/11, the band members' mental health, or substance abuse, My Chemical Romance is a dark band. I love this album, don't get me wrong, but My Chemical Romance has better and more essential albums in their discography. See, this is why I didn't want to do this. It's like making a parent pick which child is their favorite. It's wrong. Three cheers for Sweet Revenge. Three cheers for Sweet Revenge. Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge was probably my first real introduction to My Chemical Romance as far as albums go. I had heard Welcome to the Black Parade on the radio, but I was too young to really dive deep into that style of music. By the time I was in 8th grade though, I found myself gravitating more towards alternative music, pop punk, emo, and MCR was the band I dove headfirst into. Three Cheers was the first album I really remember digging into. This was the band's major label debut after signing to Reprise from Eyeball Records. It showcased the band's skills as writers and musicians, as well as set the stage for their theatricality. You saw them taking cues from Queen, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, but also bands like Black Flag, AFI, and Thursday. This was the album that gave us Helena and I'm Not Okay, as well as all the makeup and the costumes. This was the album that introduced My Chemical Romance to the mainstream. When I really started listening to My Chemical Romance, this was the album that I listened to the most. It was my first real introduction to the concept album, being about Bonnie and Clyde style lovers who perish in an encounter with authorities. And the man goes to hell and the devil says,
Hey, I can send you back to Earth and bring your chick back if you get me the souls of 1,000 evil dudes.
As a kid who already had a pretty big imagination, this album was perfect for me. Aside from the high concept storyline, there were also themes of grief and loss. That was something that I don't think I ever experienced in music before, or at least had the brain capacity to think about. So this album was pretty integral for me and my love of the band. I don't think there's a single skippable track on this album. It's all bangers. Oops, all bangers. This album is just great. Classic, even. Why isn't it at the top spot, you ask? Three Cheers is perfect. No one is denying that. And it's a good introduction to the band for new listeners. For a long time, it was my favorite My Chemical Romance record. But as I've gotten older and reevaluated my tastes, I've come to the conclusion that this is my third favorite My Chemical Romance record. And I can't explain why. Oof. Red is not my color. My Chem's debut album is great because it has this urgency that a lot of albums released around the same time just didn't have. My Chemical Romance was formed after the events of September 11th, 2001. The band practiced and played shows in earnest before heading to upstate New York and recording their album at Nada Studios within a matter of days. And despite obstacles like Gerard Way having a dental emergency and producer Jeff Rickley only having a small window with which to produce the album, they did it. They managed to produce one of the best post-hardcore albums of the early 2000s. All of MCR's records sound unique from the other ones, but this one is a lot more raw and punky, which makes sense, seeing as this was an indie release with a budget that probably cost the same as a cheap used car. But that adds so much to the post-hardcore / classic emo sound of the record. With this debut, My Chemical Romance was out to prove themselves. A lot of bands were coming out of New Jersey at the time, but none of them sounded like My Chemical Romance. And if they did, they didn't play with the same ferocity or have the same creativity. I Brought You My Bullets was a young band with a purpose, a message they wanted to get out, and an urgency they needed to act on. This album may not have gotten a lot of attention from music media around the time it was released, but I think it goes down as one of the best albums of the 2000s. My Chem really showed what they can do with this album. Not only did they prove to be one of the most interesting bands to come out of Jersey in the early 2000s, but they experimented with different styles. From the classical guitar stylings in the introduction track Romance, to the punky Vampires Will Never Hurt You, to the classic rock of Head First for Halos. I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love is not only one of the best albums of the 2000s, but one of My Chemical Romance's all-time best albums. Top 2, definitely. It really shows what they wanted to do and what they continue to do. Make music that is wholly their own. This album is essential listening for any MCR fan, or anyone looking to become a fan. You can't go wrong with this album. Emo in the 2000s was an interesting time for rock music. You had a style of music that relied on emotive storytelling, punk-inspired instrumentals, and a willingness to squeeze yourself into tight jeans and smear makeup on your face. A truly iconic era. But the emo bands that became popular also became jokes to most macho rock dudes. Fall Out Boy was gay. Panic at the Disco was gay. Paramore has a girl in it. And it wasn't taken as seriously by music publications as hipster indie bands like The Strokes or Arcade Fire. It was seen as music for kids. Sad kids. But I think public perception of emo really changed with the release of one landmark album. A lot of music nerds like myself like to discuss what they think the greatest album of the 2000s is. Whatever you think it is, you're wrong. Because the best album of the 2000s is The Black Parade. My Chemical Romance was known for their theatricality and classic rock influences, but they turned all of that up to 11 when they released their magnum opus. They took the emo and pop-punk sound that was the mainstream of alternative music in the 2000s and mixed it with classic rock, arena rock, glam rock, and proved that emo was more than what the public thought it was. A concept album about a man perishing from cancer and death coming for him in the form of his fondest memory, a parade. My Chem adopted the alter ego of the Black Parade, a kind of gothic take on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. They put on the classic black marching band suits. Gerard Way dyed his hair white to give him that kind of sickly look. They went above and beyond to make this album as unique as possible, to the point that it almost killed them. But that's a different video. The Black Parade is a classic album. It's probably the most important record in the realm of pop punk and emo. But I really think it's more than that. I think it's probably the second most important concept record of the 2000s, only to Green Day's American Idiot. And just like American Idiot, The Black Parade encapsulates the era in which it was released, but still remains timeless and listenable to this day. You can't say that about a lot of emo records released in 2006. Songs like Welcome to the Black Parade and Famous Last Words are still played on rock radio today. It has defined the band for years, becoming their most well-known and most beloved album. If you would have asked me a few years ago what my favorite My Chemical Romance album was, I don't know if I would have chosen The Black Parade. I think I probably would have gone with the more underrated punk rock Bullets. But as I've gotten older and listened to the album multiple times, I've realized that it's just perfect. There's not a single skip, not a single pause. The more I listen to the album, the more it feels like I'm listening to an important moment in musical history. The Black Parade will stand the test of time. It will be cherished by our children the way we cherished albums from the 70s and 80s and 90s. The Black Parade is MCR's best album.
So far.
It's a perfect distillation of their sound and message. It takes everything they're good at, every influence, and turns it up to the max. This album is a great place to start for anyone looking to get into the band. It is the perfect gateway to a truly spectacular discography. How would you rank My Chemical Romance's albums? What do you think of my ranking? Let me know in the comments. That's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, then I highly recommend slapping the like button and sharing this video with everyone you know. I'm trying to get to 500 subs before the end of the year, and every like, comment, share, any interaction with this video at all really helps to push this video out to more people who might be interested in what I'm doing. With all that being said, thank you for watching. As always, I'm Trevor. Stay uncool. And that is the end of the video. Goodbye.